Autistic and boring, yet occasionally entertaining. Enough about me. Let's talk about the Imperial Fists. Arguably the least interesting of the legions and chapters of Space Marines on the surface, I still quite like them, and if you like big guns, walls, or the colour yellow, chances are you'll like them too. Plus, they gave birth to the Black Templars, one of the coolest chapters in the entire setting. Created during the Unification Wars on Terra, the Fists were designed to be the fortress builders and defenders of the Imperium, specialising in siegecraft. In that way, they functioned as a mirror to the more aggressive siege tactics of the Iron Warriors, a comparison that has caused some issues over the years, but more on that later. In fact, the Legion often clashed ideologically with its brothers, notably the Space Wolves and Night Lords, who they viewed as more barbaric, less disciplined, and less noble than themselves. This wasn't helped by Dorn's reputation as a less than stellar diplomat, and it often bred resentment amongst their brother legions. Dorn was blunt, straightforward, and preferred to keep his emotions hidden where possible, including his humour. He was certainly among the most autistic of the Primarchs, and his Gene sons often inherited his adorable little quirks, like almost killing Garrow when he brought him news of the heresy. So cutesy. Unlike most of the legions, the ancient 7th Legion recruited from across Terra, even from regions where their brother legions had rights of tithe. The processes used to activate the gene seed of Rogal Dorn seemed uniquely painful among the legions, and as such, those who made it through the grueling process to become Astartes warriors were among the hardiest and most enduring of Terra's population. With this endurance often came a stoic and serious demeanour, and very few social skills. Seriously, there's a bit in one of the Space Marine Crusades books where an Imperial Fist discovers small talk. It's very wholesome and absolutely adorable. Shout out Dorn. During the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade, the Imperial Fists functioned as builders as well as conquerors, fortifying their new lands and bringing them into the Imperium permanently, rather than just taking a planet and piecing out like some of their brothers. I won't mention any names, but I'm sure you can fill that in yourself. You're a smart bunch. They had a very similar vibe to the Romans, as both warriors and builders, and fittingly, their first battle honour was called Roma. And this aptitude for fortification and defence of the worlds they took was what gave the 7th Legion their name. It had been noted by many who looked upon the lands they took that it was as if the hand of the Emperor had descended and gripped with an unbreakable fist. This description pleased the Emperor so much that he decreed the 7th Legion should be known from then on as the Imperial Fists, and he granted them the right to bear the laurels of victory as part of their heraldry. So Big E was a huge fan of these guys, mainly because they stroked his ego. As the Great Crusade wore on, and the constant fighting began to wear down their numbers, the Fists used the worlds they had fortified as supply stations and centres of recruitment, testing the populations and selecting only the most suitable to provide a constant stream of new recruits to the Legion. The stubborn, steadfast and unyielding personality that the Imperial Fists carved for themselves during this time would prepare them well for the discovery of their Primarch. As with many of the scattered Primarchs, the world that Rogal Dorn landed on, Inwit, was far from hospitable. Inwit was a frozen, miserable world orbiting a dying star. Its people formed into tribes and clans living in the massive ice hives that dotted the habitable side of the planet. It was one of these clans that discovered and adopted the child Primarch, naming him Rogal of the House of Dorn. During his time on the Ice World, Rogal would rise to lead not only his clan, but the entire world, along with its small empire in the surrounding star system, the Inwit Cluster. It was within this cluster that Rogal found his pet project, the ruined Dark Age of Technology starship known as the Phalanx. The largest ship known to have been built by humans in the galaxy, the Phalanx was repaired by Dorn, who then gifted it to the Emperor upon his discovery. The Emperor immediately, and shamelessly, re-gifted the ship back to Dorn without even the courtesy of waiting a few Christmases, whereupon it became the home and fortress monastery of the chapter. From then on, despite the homeworld of the chapter always being listed as Terra, it was the Phalanx that served as their base of operations, in addition to just being an absurdly powerful addition to their their fleet. Now, I've made no secret of my love for Perturabo on this channel, but despite that, whenever I think of him next to Dorn, I can't help but be reminded of the comparison between Robert and Stannis in Arswife. I suppose Fulgrim would be the Renly in this analogy, in case you were wondering. Robert was the true steel. Stannis is pure iron, black and hard and strong, yes, but brittle, the way iron gets. He'll break before he bends. That is, to my mind, the perfect summation of Dorn's and his legions' mentality and methodology. Instead of using the same tactics every battle and deciding that if they weren't working, then they simply weren't using them hard enough, a la the Iron Warriors, Dorn impressed upon his warriors the advantages of going into combat with a set goal in mind, not changing that goal, but rather the methods you'd use to achieve it. A nice example of this is his Pokemon battle with the lion. During a campaign, Dorn gets frustrated with the lion's progress and berates him for it. Predictably, the lion does not enjoy this and demands an honor duel, with each Primarch picking a champion from their legion. The Imperial Fist's champion fought with a greatsword, as was standard for duels, while the Dark Angel used a sword and shield, which was a bit weird. The Imperial Fist charged straight in, trying to batter down the Dark Angel with the longer reach of his sword, while the Dark Angel remained defensive, slowly inching closer and closer to negate his advantage, before pushing back and defeating the Imperial Fist. Dorn apologised to the lion, that little man-baby was happy again, and then Dorn had a really cute and oddly fatherly conversation with his champion about what had happened, saying, "My Master of Templars, you lost today not because your opponent was superior in skill, or forethought, or even deception. Barzarion did nothing but what he intended to do from the instant he donned his battleplate. He would get close enough to beat you. That was all he intended, all he needed to set into his thoughts. His will decided, all that remained was the execution. When you set eyes upon a foe with a shield, you chose your purpose, not before. You assumed that in making that choice of war gear, your opponent would defend, and thus you set your purpose to overcome that defense. You did not decide your purpose, Barzarion did. His war gear should have been irrelevant to your purpose. Your implementation of strategy would change depending upon it, but your will should have been your own, as it always was before. You saw an opponent geared for defense and thought he would defend, and so gave no consideration to the notion that perhaps his purpose was to attack. Yet also, you should have known that Barzarion could not win a duel by defense alone. You did not think about his inner purpose, because you had not settled upon your own. This was the core tenet of Dorn's philosophy, and through him his legion, that strategy must always be flexible, open to review and revision, but purpose must not. And it's this philosophy that sets the Fists apart from the Iron Warriors, despite their similarity in purpose and mutual special interest in siege warfare. Similarly to Perturabo, there's a lot more depth to Rogal Dorn than you might expect. Underneath his cold, calm demeanour lay a man of fierce willpower and ambition. Rogal did what he could for the Imperium, not because he was told to, but because he genuinely looked forward to a future of peace with the utmost joy and excitement. And even though he obeyed the Emperor's every order, he always attempted to do so while following his own moral code and principles. There's a lot to admire about Dorn, and no, I'm not just saying that because I relate to him. He also had a deep well of emotions, though he tried hard to hide them. He's often described as having a deep well of fury, but also deep affection for others. He cared deeply for his sons, and Sigismund in particular, at least until he declared the Emperor was a god. Dorn wasn't best pleased by that. His little episode I mentioned earlier, when he struck Nathaniel Garrow, happened after Garrow insulted Horus, a man Dorn deeply respected and had known for years. Dorn was the Primarch who checked in on Horus after his appointment to War Master, and it was also Dorn who put forward Loken for Horus's Mournival to guide and control his brother. Under Dorn's leadership, the Imperial Fists grew to become a famed and respected legion during the Crusade, fighting campaigns to conquer new lands for the Imperium and leaving those lands secure and well defended as they always did. Because their style of warfare and compliance aligned so closely with the Emperor's vision for his Imperium, the 7th Legion also functioned as his right hand, dispatched to key sectors not only to ensure compliance, as any old legion could have done, but to ensure it happened in a way becoming of his image. They were also sent to any front that was struggling, to shore it up with their dependability and aptitude for naval warfare. Despite being so favoured by the Emperor, Dorn's autism meant that it was Horus Lupercal, his far more diplomatic brother, who went on to be appointed War Master. Dorn and his legion, on the other hand, were appointed to the Praetorians of Terror, and would would return with the Emperor to the Sol system to oversee its defences. Throughout all of this, the Legion retained much of its original structure, organisation and tactics that it had used since leaving Terra at the outset of the Great Crusade, seeing no reason to change something that had functioned so effectively for so long. In battle, they operated as a massed shock assault force, utilising heavy armour and infantry, with a preference for reliable and precise ranged weaponry, especially bolters. This is represented on the tabletop with the Anvil Siege Force detachment giving bonuses to ranged weapons, with extra bonuses for not moving. During the Heresy, the Imperial Fists, and especially Rogal Dorn, were instrumental in marshalling the Loyalist forces to stop the traitors. After Magnus did everything wrong and locked the Emperor up defending the Webway, it was Rogal Dorn, as Praetorian of Terra, who assumed command and dispatched 7 legions to Istvan to stop Horus. Now obviously this didn't go great, but that wasn't Rogal's fault. Who wouldn't trust this cute little face? Following this failure, it was the Imperial Fists who oversaw the fortification of the Imperial Palace on Terra and fought on Mars to acquire raw materials for the Loyalist cause. The Fist garrisons throughout the galaxy were instrumental in defending their worlds from traitor attacks, and those on Terra turned the entire Sol system into concentric rings of defences to halt the traitors' advance. Rogal killed Alpharius, or Omegon, on Pluto, despite him potentially being a loyalist. Bit annoying, but you can't blame him. It was also Rogal who discovered the mortally wounded Emperor on Horus's battle barge in the aftermath of their battle, and brought him back to Terra to oversee his internment in the Golden Throne. He also held off the God of Blood and War by talking about economics, but that's a tale for another time. After the Heresy, Dorn went through a bit of a mentee bee, and led his legion across the Imperium on a crusade of penitence. He entered his Goth era, wearing all black and killing as many traitors as he could. This culminated at the Iron Cage, a huge castle Perturabo built to mock the Fists, and that Dorn besieged for several weeks. The Fists were almost wiped out, and were only saved by the Ultramarines coming to rescue them, though they viewed the losses as a way of proving their loyalty to the Imperium, and cleansing themselves of their failure to defend the Emperor. The Fists have a bit of a self-flagellation kink going on. They often use something called a pain glove to induce visions and meditate on their failures. Bit weird, but I'm not one to shame. What was left of the Legion was split into 3 chapters. The most zealous and religious of them became the Black Templars, one of the coolest chapters in the setting. The more rational and newly recruited became the Crimson Fists, who you may recognise as the first ever chapter of Space Marines, as far as art goes, and those most devoted to their Primarch and Legion remained as the Imperial Fists, led by Dorn until his disappearance 20 years later. The chapter's most holy relic is Dorn's fist, the only part of his body to be recovered after a desperate attack on a Chaos starship. Each chapter master of the fists engraves their name on the skeleton of the hand too, which is cute, if a bit morbid. So that was the most autistic of the legions, the Imperial Fists. Potentially the butter on toast of the legions, on par with the Ultramarines. They're still fun and interesting in their own way. If you watched this far in the video, thank you so much. It really does mean a lot. And please let me know what you think of the Fists in the comment. Like, subscribe, all the rest, and I'll see you in the next video.